Welcome to TVBS Meeting Room, where we tackle global issues with a view from Taiwan. I'm your host, Wen-Chi. Cybersecurity has emerged as a new frontier of warfare. It encompasses a range of activities, including hacking, espionage, sabotage, and disinformation campaigns conducted through the use of computers, wires, land and undersea cables, and the internet, etc. According to Taiwan's National Security Bureau, the Taiwanese government networks experienced a daily average of 2.4 million cyber attacks in 2024, most of which were attributed to Chinese state-backed hackers. This represents double the daily average from 2023. Today's guest is Mark Montgomery with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He leads their Center for Cyber and Technology Innovation. He also served in the White House National Security Council working on transnational threats in the U.S. Senate and retired as a Rear Admiral in the U.S. Navy. Welcome, Mark.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Wen-Chi. It's a real pleasure to be on with our friends and partners in Taiwan.
So there have been alarming reports about China's cybersecurity threats to the United States. What's new this time is the apparent target of critical infrastructures with no intelligence value. So this led the U.S. national security officials to conclude that China is actually preparing to deter and intimidate the U.S. for a potential conflict, likely over Taiwan. As a U.S. cybersecurity expert who led a former congressional commission on this very important issue, can you share what you know about these attacks?
Thanks for asking. You're absolutely asking the most important question, which is how is China's aggressive cyber malicious activity against the United States and its allies and partners like Taiwan changing? And the answer is it's moved from what was historically intellectual property theft and some malicious activity to what we now call operational preparation of the battlefield. You know, it's a military term, but it really means placing cyber malicious payloads, that is, cyber payloads that at a later date you could activate to cause a disruption in a service. And we found them placing them in our electrical power grids, rail systems, port systems, water systems, the kind of stuff that's necessary for the U.S. to move military equipment or supplies or troops in the time of a crisis. So from my perspective, this is a whole new, this is no longer espionage.
Yeah.
This is no longer intellectual property theft to support Chinese businesses. Both of those are bad enough. But this is the first step in making sure that the United States won't come to the relief or support of its allies and partners, say in the Pacific, like Taiwan, Japan, and Korea, in a time of a crisis.
Yeah, I mean, how you have, touched on what we were going to discuss next is actually how have they evolved over the years, right? As you mentioned, initially it started as almost like a commercial thief kind of behavior, which has always been a big concern between US and China. But now it seems that purely commercial efforts from China have evolved into something that is more state-oriented. Is that the right kind of characterization of China's cyber threats?
You're absolutely right to characterize it as growing. It's increased tenfold probably in the size of their offensive operations over the last 15 years. So
and more sophisticated as well, right?
And more sophisticated, yeah. So, and what I was going to also say is I always think it was state-backed. It's the target on the other end that has changed, and it's certainly changed from like trying to grab the F-35 plans, in a U.S. server. They're still trying to do that, but instead of being 90% of the effort, that's maybe 20 or 25% of the effort. Then there's traditional espionage. They're now breaking into the systems of our Commerce Department, our Treasury Department, our State Department to read the emails of our senior officials. That's grown significantly. So while what's happened is the target has changed from commercial targets to military targets or commercial targets to support military activities. And so these are big changes. And I think it's the same in Taiwan and in Japan. We've seen this transition, and no country is under more cyber duress on a day-to-day basis than Taiwan.
Exactly,
from the
as the
attacks of
stats
China.
I just shared. And I want to mention, obviously, this has risen as a point of tension between US and China. And so I still remember when President Obama was in the White House, he was the very first one to openly actually blame China for cyber attacks on the US government, including at that time the hacking of US government personnel data. And he raised it at the level of President Xi Jinping. And so the two countries signed an agreement in 2015, almost 10 years ago. So what was in the agreement and how's that going? Why is it that there's still so many, obviously, hacking?
Yeah, I remember that well. 2015, it was in the Rose Garden. At the time, I was working in Indo-Pacific Command as the head of all operations for our military out in the Pacific, and it was two things. One was cyber; they were gonna reduce and eliminate their malicious cyber activity, and two is they were going to stop their island reclamation campaign in the South China Sea.
So can I pause on this? So the first part about it. So they agreed to reduce that, which means they admitted that they were part of it, and so they're willing to work with the U.S. on reducing the attacks.
So, as you probably know, the Chinese Communist Party does not often, if ever, acknowledge they've done anything wrong. So I would say they did not acknowledge anything was wrong. They acknowledged that things wouldn't be wrong going forward. And in both cases, whether it was the island reclamation or the cyber, within 12 to 18 months, things were back at full steam. I think the goal there was at the end of the Obama administration, with a year and a half to go, to kind of prevent the Obama administration from taking aggressive action against China. And indeed, they were successful. We were told to kind of stand down a little bit in our pushback against certain operations. And what China did was what the Chinese Communist Party did was reorient how it organized its cyber forces, and they spent about 12 months doing that. Then they were back out doing bad behavior, and as you've mentioned already, the increase in bad behavior in the 10 years since then, I would say that you could almost have a tenfold increase in bad behavior.
Yeah. Well, so the question has always been, are the hackers backed by the Chinese government or the military? What do we know so far?
100% we believe, our attributions of Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon, and
How did the U.S. come to that conclusion?
I think we look at the threat signatures used, and then we study threat signatures. We've seen Chinese intelligence, cyber intelligence, cyber military.
What is threat signature? Just
like
for our
a cyber fingerprint, like what type of tool you use, how you surveil the area, what tools you use to penetrate, what tools you use to install. It kind of leaves a fingerprint. Each type hacking team kind of has a fingerprint like that. So even within the Chinese intelligence services and Chinese military services, we can tell which team is doing which work. I'm sure they can do the same with our teams to some degree, but we're attributing these to China pretty consistently and much faster than we used to, because they're pretty brazen in how they're doing it. This is not they don't I don't believe they mind us knowing it's them. They would not acknowledge it's them. They won't admit it's them.
But what do they really want if what they're trying to tell you almost implicitly that, this is the Chinese government is doing this? What do they want?
They're signaling to us that it's the United States doesn't need to be involved if there's a cross-strait Taiwan problem. That you're a very vulnerable country with a national critical infrastructure. We, the United States, are a very vulnerable country with a vulnerable national critical infrastructure that they can penetrate, put in malware. And if we decide we want to start moving forces and supplies and equipment to supporting an ally, whether it's the Philippines in a South China Sea issue, Taiwan in a Taiwan Strait issue, or Japan in an East China Sea issue, they will disrupt our ability to move forces. They will disrupt our ability to generate economic power. And that it's not worth the United States. They will bring the problem to the United States. I believe that's the signal that's behind this effort, and it should concern us very much.
So you do believe, I don't know how much you can reveal, that they are trying to do this to the United States, but with Taiwan in mind. So their ultimate objective or goal is not so much to cripple the US infrastructure, but more to say, if we do something to Taiwan, don't get involved. Is that right?
That's correct. And the only country that's, as I said, that's getting more of this kind of cyber enabled, economic pressure is Taiwan. And I think so that there's a signal there.
You didn't see Chinese doing that to other countries, for example, Japan, Korea, Australia, or perhaps the UK, other sort of strong US allies?
So I would say this, the target set is Taiwan, United States, Japan, Australia, but in that order, and certainly Taiwan and the United States are are far above the number one and number two targets. And look, there's no doubt in my mind that the Chinese Communist Party's goal here would be to execute a cyber-enabled information operations campaign against Taiwan, where they pressure Taiwan with financial services attacks, energy attacks, communications attacks, and then at the same time do these disruptive activities in the United States that say, do not get involved in this. If you get involved, we'll do more to you. But in the meantime, we're going to do this because, look, I reasonably believe that Chairman Xi wants Taiwan integrated back into China, but not a broken Taiwan, just a Taiwan that's bent to his will. So I think that the cyber resilience we're trying to preserve in the United States, it's equally important that Taiwan be doing the same thing.
What you just said gave me real goosebumps. So it sounds like the way, China is likely to do something to Taiwan is not limited to sort of the traditional military warfare, and cyber has become truly a modern form of warfare. And I want to talk about the Congressional Cyberspace Commission that was established in 2019, because you had led that commission. What was the purpose of establishing a commission like that in U.S. Congress, and how it's working right now? Because as I understand it, it's become a nonprofit organization.
So what happened is I worked for Senator McCain, and in his last year in office, he a good friend of Taiwan, by the way, Senator McCain.
Yes.
But he in his last year in office, he said, "Look, we are not protecting ourselves in cyberspace. We can't protect our critical infrastructure. We need a new strategic approach with new legislation and new executive branch understanding." And he was right. He set up the commission. He said, "You have exactly 3 years: 1 year to write a report, and 2 years to execute the problems." And he was a real stickler for, just having short commissions. So he then asked, I was asked to run it after Senator McCain passed away. And I ran the commission for 3 years. I started it up, ran it, and then shut it down. And then because we didn't achieve everything we wanted, we did set up a nonprofit that I run now with Senator King and Representative Mike Gallagher. The chairman of the commissions are now the chairman of my nonprofit. But our goal there was to write legislation to improve our cyber resilience, write legislation to improve our government's defense of its own networks, and then also to improve our offensive capabilities so that we could do cost imposition on China to try to deter them from attacking the United States, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, and others. We achieved about 80% of our tasking. We've still got 20% to go, and we're working on it hard. But that doesn't mean we're at 80%, that 80% is done, because it takes several years for laws to take effect, for appropriations or resources to procure what you need. So we're getting stronger, we're getting more resilient, but we're not there yet, and it's going to take some period of time.
Yeah, so let's talk about it, because I think cyberspace, as I mentioned in the very beginning, is now more on people's radar. And during Trump administration, I believe he was the president that first really, at least his administration called to attention sort of what technology companies, especially those from headquartered in China, could pose in terms of threats to whether it's, American personal data or other threats. And so TikTok now is back in the news cycle again, and there's so much about it. But initially, the real concern about TikTok was really about whether the security of American users' data would be jeopardized because of TikTok's ownership that is in Beijing. So I understand that you were involved in the drafting or in the writing of the legislation. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the concern, where the concern came from, especially regarding Chinese private companies? And what the U.S. decided or decides to deal with those threats.
Yeah, thanks. It's a very timely issue. The Supreme Court's just heard the case last Friday and should make its ruling later this week on TikTok. And of course, it's not a ban.
What do you think the ruling is going to be?
I think that the law will be affirmed. In other words, the law will carry through, and
So TikTok will be banned.
It'll be required to divest by Friday. And since they've done none of the work to divest, find a purchaser from a non-country of concern like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, they haven't done that work. They'll be banned until they're able to divest.
Under the circumstances of change of ownership, basically.
That's right. And look, this was a national security issue. We did not want a country of concern. I listed who they were. I mean, you can include Venezuela and South Sudan. Not good countries owning a system, operating a system where they got such personal data on 170 million Americans. That was national security concern number one. But national security concern number two was the way that the algorithm was manipulated by, I believe, ByteDance at the direction of the Chinese intelligence services. The TikTok algorithm was manipulated so that issues like Uyghur genocide were 12 times more likely to be seen on Instagram than on TikTok. Taiwan, independence more likely to be seen on Instagram, 16 times more likely than on TikTok. Hong Kong independence, the same. Tibetan independence, 40 times more likely on Instagram.
And you're referring to not sort of algorithm within mainland China, but are you referring to TikTok in the United States, which means they're trying to control the content that is not just for their own citizens, but in America. Is that right?
Exactly. It bothers me that they control the narrative for their own citizens, but that's not an American problem. You're exactly right. What bothers us is the narrative manipulation in the United States. And they moved beyond China issues. We started to find like Russia, Ukraine was 8 times more likely to support Ukraine on Instagram, or Israel, Hamas. So on issues where the United States national security was generally not a China issue, they were still manipulating it. It was clear that someone was directing the algorithmic, changes in the algorithm to drive these national security narrative changes. So when you combine that with the data privacy issue, and I think your audience is aware of just how many laws that China has passed since 2015, the national security laws, national counterintelligence laws, national intelligence collection laws that require Chinese companies to basically open their books and their servers and their systems to the Chinese intelligence service at their request. When you combine those two together, it's not that TikTok has to be banned. It's that TikTok cannot be owned,
controlled, manipulated by Beijing.
Manipulated, exactly, by a country of concern, in this case, Beijing. So I think the law will be upheld by either 8-1 or 9-0 vote on Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that I just saw some news headline that they're trying to see if Elon Musk can buy TikTok. And it's actually from the Chinese officials. So this will continue to be a fascinating case for people to watch. But I also wanted to, just ask if you have any advice for Taiwan, because all these issues that are manifested in the United States right now, including TikTok, there's also a heated discussion in Taiwan whether TikTok should be banned. And of course, Taiwan is a country that really supports freedom of speech. That becomes an issue as well, because people don't believe that platforms should be censored. But obviously, as you mentioned, Taiwan is a major target. So how should Taiwan think about those issues, balancing national security as well as freedom of speech, like in the United States?
So first, I would want to mention that Taiwan is aggressively, it seems to me, to be aggressively tackling this cyber resilience issue. The President Lai set up a whole of society defense resilience task force. I've met with some of the National Security Council officials like Fei Fan Lin and
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Su Chin Su, and I believe they're really on the right track. They're doing what our Cyber Commission did. They're attacking these issues. They're under in my mind, a much deeper, more aggressive threat from Beijing than even the United States systems. But this is like an elephant. You have to bite it. You have to eat it one bite at a time. So they just need to get working on this task force. Look, in the issue of TikTok, I would say this. Look, the United States has probably the strongest First Amendment provisions in the world in our Constitution, but in the end,
About freedom of speech.
about freedom of speech, but in the end, no country should allow another country's government and intelligence services to broadcast propaganda, persistently and unchecked into their country. Look, China is broadcasting into Taiwan through so many different means. Taking down TikTok will be a much smaller percentage of the problem than it is in the United States. In the United States, it's a primary vehicle for Beijing. In Taiwan, I think TikTok's one of many vehicles they use because of the proximity, because of the shared languages. There's just much more. There's much more effort going in.
Easier as well. Yeah.
Yeah, much more propaganda coming in. I think I would just say this: look at TikTok as it's run in China proper. And look at TikTok as it's run in the rest of the world. They're two different toys. What my kids have on TikTok, are dance videos and cat videos. What kids in Shanghai and Beijing have on TikTok is STEM education. I mean, it's just a science, technology, engineering education. It's just a different tool in that country, and that says a lot about what China thinks about traditional TikTok as it is in America. So I hope, I'm not telling Taiwan that they should ban TikTok, but I am saying they should be very aware of all the different methods with which Beijing spreads propaganda in Taiwan.
Well, you have mentioned that no country should allow other countries to have their government-backed or intelligence-backed almost interference in their social media. Do you believe that the U.S. is doing the same thing in other countries?
You can listen to Voice of America, and you tell me if that's a manipulation of the national security narrative. It's not. Radio Free Asia, and these are very limited efforts by the United States that routinely get defunded. I mean, not only do I not think we do it, I don't even think we tell our own story well. I mean, I don't even think we fund enough to say, hey, this is why democracy, transparency, capitalism are the best way. This is why the Chinese approaches to sovereignty, to rule of law, to transparency the wrong way. We barely tell the story. So I don't think we do it. I don't think we practice information operations in the same methodology that the authoritarian states do. I mean, that's one of the beauties of democracy. We struggle to tell a lie. It doesn't mean we're perfect. It doesn't mean we don't make lots of mistakes. But I don't think we're oriented in the same way that China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran are. And that's a reason why countries like Taiwan, Japan, Korea have put themselves on a much clearer path towards transparency and a rules-based system.
Well, I have to ask you, with days of inauguration, what do you think the Trump administration's cybersecurity, cyber policy will look like?
Well, look, first of all, I think just like when 90% of what Trump was doing was carried on by Biden in cyber, 90% of what Biden is doing will be carried on by Trump. But that 10% new is going to be different. And I think it's going to be a much more aggressive approach to confronting Chinese malicious activity and Russian malicious activity, and what criminal actors are doing in our country. So I think there'll be more offensive pushback on cyber actors.
Interesting. Offensive pushback. Okay, so it's not just defensive, but like what would be the offense side of things?
So I think we would probably respond with cyber tools, but I think we've reached that point now where it's time for us to say, if this advanced persistent threat team from China located in this building in Shanghai or Beijing is doing these attacks, we're going to go in and damage their cyber infrastructure, the networks on which they plan and execute their attacks, where they
That is a war in some way, right?
Yeah, I think we would do it with Title 54 with intelligence forces. But I would say at this point, we've got to hold them accountable. You cannot deter them. From what I can tell, we can try increased sanctions. I don't believe they've worked in cyber. If we do sanctions that like go after Chinese leadership and the money that they keep in the United States and the family members they keep in the United States, which is significant, then that could be another path. But I would use any tool I had to more offensively go after them. Usually, the U.S. uses sanctions, espionage, things like that. But I think we're at the point now where it's worth destroying some cyber infrastructure. That doesn't kill people. It doesn't hurt people, but it stops them from being able to conduct these activities for a period of weeks or months or even a year.
Well, thank you for that. With that comment, we'll be very looking forward to see what the new relationship will look like between U.S. and China, and of course, U.S.-Taiwan and the triangular relationship as well, especially when it comes to the space of cybersecurity and other more modern type of threats and security issues. So, well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us today, and we hope to have you back in the near future, and take care.
Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to rejoining you.